All right, so I want to kick it off here if we could. We're going to start off with Adam. And the question is this: we want to focus this panel here on kind of this intersection. These students now, higher ed is catching on. These classically educated students are amazing, and they're arriving now in droves on a lot of college campuses. Adam, as VP of Enrollment, as former Director of Admissions, what are you noticing? Do classically educated students stand out academically on campus?
Sure, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having us here, and thank you to Palm Beach Atlantic for hosting. I think that's a great question. I think the really easy answer for Ave Maria is we're a Catholic institution that has a robust liberal arts core curriculum, right? So if you haven't studied the classical liberal arts, it can be a little bit of a foreign concept stepping in freshman year. So I think it's an easy transition for students who have studied it at the high school level, and certainly makes them attractive as applicants and candidates as they're applying. But I think more than that, more than just familiarity with the content, is sort of familiarity and comfortability with the themes of what it is that classical education is trying to do. And I think that the formation that it gives in critical thinking, right, reading, writing, speaking, rhetoric, right, if you haven't studied the liberal arts before, you may not be as familiar with those things. Yeah, then I think the moral formation, right, the teaching to be human, ultimately what we want is the formation of the whole person, right? And so if you've done that before, you tend to do well at a place like Ave Maria. I will say, though, we have a very high population of homeschooled students. Even in our athletic programs, right, I think we have more homeschooled students on athletic scholarships than just about any other college in the country. The National Catholic Register wrote an article on it a few years ago and interviewed our athletic director and head football coach. How do homeschooled students stand out at Ave Maria? And I think that this is sort of related to how do classical students stand out at Ave Maria. And there's a very real way in which they don't. They're any other child, they're any other student, homeschooled, classically educated, and I think that classical education plays a large part in that, preparing them, socially to deal with college and the next phases of their life. So,
thank you. Dr. McGuire, I'm wondering if you could speak for a moment here just to introduce our audience. Some of you are already very aware of what will they learn at this great program at ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, where essentially they're grading colleges based on the strength of their core curriculum. It is my belief, as I've come to know more and more about the history of higher ed, especially in the past 50 years, that one of the main stories is college after college trashing any kind of a serious core curriculum. ACTA is doing something about it. Dr. McGuire, if you could tell us about that.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here with all of you. So for about 13 years now, ACTA has been operating this program, What Will They Learn?, where we give schools a grade based on what they require in their core curriculum. So we want them to offer composition, literature, it includes economics, foreign language, sciences. 22 schools receive an A grade. Over 300 schools receive a B grade, which is very good by our standards, considering that only 22 schools receive an A. All three of the institutions that are represented here on the stage with me today all receive B grades, which again is very excellent in the What Will They Learn assessment. And with this new scholarship that you mentioned, students that matriculate to their institutions, I believe, would all be eligible, provided that they scored in is it the top 1%?
That's right, that's right. Hey, can you list the academic categories that you're grading based off of?
Sure, yeah. So composition, literature, foreign language, which to meet that, they have to actually require students to take 3 semesters worth of foreign language, U.S. history or government, economics, mathematics, and science, preferably a lab science. To get an A, you have to require students to take all of those, or at least you can be missing 1. To get a B, you can get a B if you're missing 2, right? So the standard is very high. Very few schools. I'm not sure if any school gets a 7 out of 7 I should say that there are 17 schools, including the 3 represented here in the state of Florida, that receive a B. There's only one Ivy League school that receives a B. That might not surprise people in this room. But now, I said we've been doing it for 13 years. I think we did about 100 schools the first time we did it. Now we do 1,130, I think, in our last assessment. So we're evaluating a lot of schools. We bring in an army of interns every summer who help us, and we go through all of the course catalogs and the course descriptions. When necessary, we talk to people on the ground to get a sense of what's actually being required, and we evaluate these schools.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Eric next and ask this same question yesterday in a podcast interview I did with Dr. Tom St. Antoine. I think we should all agree right now that's the best name ever, by the way. Just love the name. Eric, the question I asked him is, every college represented on this stage right now, Hillsdale, Ave Maria, Palm Beach Atlantic University, in major ways, bucking a pretty noticeable now enrollment trend nationwide, where we've had a 13% contraction in young people going to 4-year brick and mortar liberal arts colleges. During that same time, record enrollment at Ave, record enrollment at PBA, record apps to Hillsdale. Can you comment on that trend, especially as you're working with so many schools in the charter space, and how, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I get asked by people if this work we're doing in charter schools is an enrollment scheme. We're trying to boost our enrollment numbers, and I laugh because that would be the most inefficient program you could possibly run to boost enrollment numbers, especially because we regularly, kids who graduate from our K-12 schools will get denied admission to Hillsdale. It's one of the... It's great to have enrollment be so competitive, but it's also sad to see those kids that don't get in. So speaking to the broader trend there, I think that there are places who have managed to set themselves apart. There's lots of different ways that that's happened. I think during COVID, the extent to which schools wanted to get open quickly was a big driver of that. People recognized, politics aside, I'm 19 years old and I want to be in school with my friends. I want to learn in that physical space, and so I think that drove a lot of enrollments. I think though that it's happening at the same time that something else is happening, and that's that people are beginning to realize that maybe the college degree is not worth what it was. Maybe when everybody has a college degree, it's not really worth that much. And you look at, I go to my hometown, and I'm from Tucson, and I drive around, and 20 years later, it's amazing how much has grown up around the university, not around actually trying to support the studying that's happening at the university, but rather these 4-story condominiums with pools and everything that are designed to make it so that you have 4 years of resort living. Yeah. 4 years of resort living sounds nice to just about any of us, especially if you can get away with it at 18 years old. I just wonder, what's that really represent to people? And I think what we'll see is that schools that are able to distinguish themselves, that sort of upper crust of schools, will manage to continue to grow. And I think there's a whole lot of schools in the middle there that are just going to suffer and fold. And certainly that's been a regular thing that's been happening amongst liberal arts colleges for the last 20 or 30 years. A couple closing every year.
Thank you. So I'll take this question first to Dr. Tom St. Antoine, and then maybe comments from all the panelists as well. I've been kind of surprised as I've started touring classical Christian schools over the past 7 years since starting CLT. You walk the halls, you see the pennants, you see where all the seniors are going, and at times I'd say it's actually very shocking. You just see the Penn States and maybe the Ivies, and you're like, is nobody here going to Grove City or Thomas Aquinas or PBA or Ave? And even talking to some families, sometimes there's a bit of a sense of, we did a great classical K-12 and want to see something a little different. I'm wondering, in your conversations, with families, is there wrestling through that? Do we continue on with this kind of education? What are those conversations like? What advice do you have for families?
Yeah, thank you. Well, welcome, first of all. I hope you all have enjoyed your time at PBA and your time in West Palm Beach. Please do come back. Yeah, conversations with families who've experienced classical learning in whatever form. I always start with this story, and I guess, first of all, let me express just sort of the gratitude for the work that you all do, and for the students who we do get who are a product of this type of education. I'm grateful for what you do, and when we meet with these families, something deep down inside me tells me you've got to explain to these students why they need to read some of these books again, books that they've already read. And I get very early in the sales pitch, and students are already losing interest. And I realize it's because they already understand this, right? They already know that you don't read Dante once and put it back on the shelf and never revisit it. Shakespeare, Milton, and so on. These are books that will be companions for a lifetime. These are books which will be read a little bit differently when you're in high school compared to college and as an adult. And so, sometimes it's harder to convince students from a public school to read these books one time than it is for a classical student to read them multiple times. And so, I guess what that's an indicator of is students who are a product of this type of education have cultivated a joy for learning, a love for learning, a passion about the life of the mind, which is maybe the most important thing for the students and for us. We want, we don't want school to interfere with our education, and that's kind of what we try to do in honors, is to keep the first thing, and help these students to keep going. In some case, for many of our students, it's the first time they read these books, but for many of our students, it will be a return to a familiar friend. And so, for those students who have begun that journey, I think it's very important to be at a place where you can continue that and not just sort of put that learning aside and sort of go back to other forms of learning.
Thank you. Yeah, Adam, comments?
Sure. Tom, I really like that idea of continuing to read the things that you've already read once. I had a professor at Ave Maria. Actually, I think all three of us, at least on this side of the stage, are undergraduate alumni of the institutions that we now work for, right? Yeah. So at Ave Maria, I studied humanities with Dr. Mike Segru, who, we headed into our first week with Plato's Republic, and he said, I just want to warn you that no one can actually read Plato's Republic until you've already read Plato's Republic. It was really encouraging as we headed into the assessment, Tracy. That made that assessment less fun, knowing that. But so I think I have two thoughts there. One is, I think it's very important that at these high schools, classical schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools, that there is buy-in to the mission of that institution across the board from the top down, right? Which is why I'm so happy to see so many heads of school and principals and deans here from these high schools. It's really, really, really important that the college counselors also buy into that mission, because if they don't, they're just going to do college counseling, which at most institutions wants you to place as many of your students as you possibly can, get them offered as much scholarship money as you possibly can in the most prestigious institutions that you possibly can, right? And unless you have someone in that role at your institution, at your school, who's actually actively encouraging the mission of the school, it makes my life really difficult, right? Walking into a college where, the college counselor says, well, yeah, you're another school, right? It's, no, there's something more than that going on here. So I think that's very necessary for families and students to realize how important it is to continue what it is they have been doing. The other thing is, Corey DeAngelo said last night, we send our children to Caesar for school, and we're surprised when they come back Romans, right? There's a reason why you've done classical education or Christian education or Catholic education for the last, 13 years of your children's lives, and probably those are the same values that you've tried to instill from the moment that they were born, right? So you're going to do that for 13 years, and then they're going to turn 18 years old and say, well, it was a good 13 years, it was a good 18 years, but yeah, we'll try Caesar. That seems so bizarre to me. Why would you do that? If if you understand the purpose of education being the formation of the person, trying to make us more human, right, then wouldn't you want the pinnacle of that to continue that work? So I think that's important for people to realize as they make these decisions.
Great. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I chime in on that too, because I think this talk about the college counselor's office is really important. It's really important that we honor the right things in our schools. And it's so commonplace to celebrate the admissions to Harvard, the admissions to Yale, these institutions. And there's even folks at Hillsdale who will say, oh, Hillsdale, it's like it's the conservative Harvard. We should do away with that language. Harvard should want to be the liberal Hillsdale. But there's these sort of, these commonplaces that we, of these institutions that we ascribe value to, that I think in many cases don't have the value that they had a generation ago, but we still talk about them as though they do. And so, there are certain parents that need to be reassured, right, to hear that kids from this school graduated and went to this college and that college. And so you can't do away with that entirely, but make sure that that's not, happy graduating class of 2023. Isn't it exciting that Jordan is going to Harvard? But rather, finding other things to celebrate about the graduating class. The other thought I had about this is that we're very careful to not brand our schools as being college prep schools and to tell them not to brand themselves as college prep schools, because otherwise there's a tendency of kids once they reach 9th or 10th grade to realize, well, I'm not college bound, so this school is really not for me. I don't need the college prep components of this. And back in 2016, there was this dichotomy in the Republican presidential race about sort of whether or not we needed more plumbers or more philosophers. And we're soundly of the position that we need more philosophers who are trained we need more plumbers who are trained in philosophy, and that this doesn't have to be this sort of weird dichotomy. And so I think there's lots of kids that we probably don't, probably college is not in their future, and we want to make sure that this classical liberal arts K-12 education helps to prepare them for life. But then beyond that, I think, the reason why why we're doing a classical education in 13 years is because we only have 13 years. Would that we had a lot more, would that we can continue it beyond that, and so great for those kids to go to places where they can continue that in college.
That's great. Dr. McGuire.
Yeah, so I think, from the standpoint of ACTA and what will they learn, we're evaluating the core curriculum that's required. And so, like I said, there's a number of schools, some that are private, some that are public, that meet those requirements. But I think there's a variety of other things that people will want to consider when they're thinking about where to send their kids to school. And I would think that, parents who have committed to getting their students or their children a classical education from K to 12 would hopefully appreciate the intrinsic value of a classical education. The idea of becoming a lifelong learner, understanding that contemplation is one of the highest expressions of human life or of human activity, understanding things like moral formation and the cultivation of virtue or character. And so when you're looking at a college or university where you're going to send young people who are still just 17, 18 years old in most cases, I think you want to take seriously into consideration, well, what is the overall educational vision of that institution? They may require a philosophy class, but the content of that philosophy class could be very different from institution to institution, depending on what the animating spirit of that place is. And then, just more generally, the culture, right? And, what sort of values does the institution represent? And does it live up to the values that it says that it represents? Because there's a lot of institutions, you could go look at their mission statement and it will say, we care about X, Y, and Z, but anybody on the ground there will know that, well, they don't really care about X, Y, and Z. Some lucky professor on a committee somewhere got that word contemplation in there somehow, because nobody else knew that meant something, or something like that. But really, the place doesn't believe in that. And also, I'll just say, in terms of my own experiences as a professor, I have had classically educated students in my classes, and they stand out. And if you go to a place where most of the other students are not classically educated, that can impact your experience in various ways. Whereas if you're in a class full of people who have been cultivated to love learning for its own sake, and they have some background with the texts that you're reading, you can have a much more advanced and fruitful discussion. Whereas if you're in a room full of other students who have, say, never read Homer's Odyssey or whatever it is before, you'll spend most of the class just establishing the plot line, which you'll already know if you've had a classical education.
That's great. That's great. I want to begin this, actually just kind of shift the conversation beyond higher ed and actually talk about career. I know that in the classical world, and CLT says this as much as anyone, because College Board is always saying college and career readiness, college and career. We're like, no, that's not the point of education. But at the same time, I think one of the reasons CLT has been a successful underdog is because 2/3 of our employees went to either Hillsdale or St. John's College in Annapolis or Patrick Henry College. We're going to get some from Ave and Palm Beach Atlantic very soon, for sure. But they're incredible. They make amazing employees. In fact, I was at a kind of a CEO happy hour a couple years ago, and CEO who in no way is connected to the work that we're doing here was saying, I actually view an increasing number of degrees on applications almost as liabilities. And he named some of the state schools. He said, what do I know? They went to a fraternity and they partied for 4 years and didn't get much of any kind of that's pretty wild that a CEO would be saying that. So the question is this: are companies picking up on that the best and the brightest are coming out of your colleges or coming out of the classical education? Are we going to see that more in 5 years, or are we already starting to see that? So we'll start here with Dr. Thompson Antoine.
Yeah, I guess maybe two things. It's really interesting, and I think as parents, maybe sometimes a lot of parents are really especially guilty of this. We want brand name universities to sort our students, but not to form them, right? Go to that prestigious school and attach your name and put them in the winner basket, sort them into the right basket, but don't impart your liberal values on them, right? So sort them, but don't form them, which I'm not sure if that's productive. So as far as employability of students, so our honors program is named after Frederick M. Supper, who is a business consultant. He actually did time and motion studies and efficiency studies in businesses all over the world. And he sold the business in the mid-'80s. He lived over on the island of Palm Beach and came to our president at the time and said, I've been in every kind of business all over the world, and I've noticed something. Business schools are actually doing a really, really good job training students to go out into the world and work. But there's something missing. And he couldn't probably quite articulate it at the time, but what was missing was the character formation. Are these the kinds of people who you would entrust your business to? Are these the kinds of people who you'd want to represent you with customers? All of the kinds of things that we've known for a long, long time, the character formation that we experience in the liberal arts. And so he even then recognized that training wasn't enough for the kinds of employees that businesses needed. And our, PBA's response at the time was, I think you're right, but we've also noticed the same thing in healthcare, in education, in the arts. And so our honors program was sort of formed, the original origin story was for us to produce literate, well-read, well-rounded people for business. But it was, almost immediately apparent that industries and professions beyond just the business world are also desperately in need of these kinds of graduates who are not just trained, but also educated.
I think that's well said. And, I noticed today, being on campus, between sessions, I sat down to try to get a little work done outside a stairwell, which wasn't a great place to sit because students kept walking back and forth and I was just in their way. But what I noticed was that every single student from Palm Beach Atlantic who walked past me said hello, smiled, or said excuse me, or whatever the case was. And I've been on Hillsdale's campus as well, and the same thing is true of Hillsdale students. I think the same thing is true of Ave Maria students. And I think that speaks well of the institutions, just how well-mannered perhaps the students are, and I think that has to do with the formation. And certainly part of that is the moral formation, right? There's certain Christian virtues, I think, that are cultivated and in all of our institutions. But part of it, I think, is the liberal arts education as well. So, Tom, to your point about employers are looking for people who they can entrust their business to, right? For as much as perhaps the outside world claims to be sort of relativistic, they're not, right? No one's actually that, right? We when push comes to shove, you would trust the person whose sort of formation and foundation, would make you want to have them represent you, right? So I think for young people who have been educated in this way, it gives them an immediate advantage walking into interviews and just sort of knowing how to behave in those situations. And then in terms of their education, I think critical thinking and analytical reading and reasoned writing, and then presentations. I mean, the number of oral presentations that I had to give at Ave Maria University as a student, was astounding. I'd never had to present as much in my life. And then teaching afterwards and working in sales for a while, the preparation that it gave me to do that, and the preparation that I think these types of educations give students to do those things, that's exactly what employers are looking for. So.
Thank you. Thanks. And Eric and if you could maybe even speak a little bit about how in a job market that is evolving faster than ever, changing faster than ever, and then also with AI and what AI might be doing in 3 or 4 years, how these students might be uniquely equipped to navigate that.
Yikes. I didn't realize I was going to have to talk about chatbot GPT. Well, I mean, I guess, so something that was said earlier about the importance of word of mouth for sort of marketing about your school. I think the same thing is true for your graduates, that once the word gets out about, we want that kind of person working for this firm, maybe it's because the owner graduated from the institution, or maybe it's because you've hired interns or other people from the institution, and that really speaks volumes. So we hear that from people who have hired Hillsdale grads and want to keep doing that. I mean, I guess the interesting thing about what AI seems to be capable of is that in the past we've always thought about computers as being simply something that can do sort of quantifiable stuff better than the average person. Certainly way better than the average person, right? I mean, you can do stuff with a computer that it would take all of us years to calculate, and you can do it in seconds. But verbal formation, language, was always something that computers weren't very good at. And now that we seem to be turning a corner on that. And there are certainly going to be those who say, well, just like the people who said that we don't need to learn how to do rote math skills because we have calculators now, there will, I'm sure, be those that say, well, we don't really need to teach our kids language skills because computers can do that for them. Just like with the math thing, that will cause a huge falling out of people who could have been taught to do math well, who could have learned to have decent verbal skills, who are now that's just going to be left behind. So that's going to be a huge missed opportunity for many. But it's for those of us who are really teaching kids how to speak, who are beginning with sort of the fundamental things about teaching language. and continuing those all the way up. One of the things I like to talk about our curriculum is that we start with language, with a phonics-based program to teach kids how to read. We move into grammar, then composition. We have a logic and a rhetoric class, and sort of the build on those things in the high school. And then you cap it all off with a senior thesis. And that senior thesis is a written paper, it's a college level paper, and it's also it's an adult level presentation of your paper to your peers and to your advisors. And so that formation in language instruction doesn't seem likely to be eclipsed by computers anytime soon, and will be increasingly valuable in a world in which we're surrounded by chatbot written text.
Right, Dr. McGuire.
Can I comment on ChatGPT as a former professor? That's a great answer. I think if an essay is written and nobody wrote it and nobody reads it, did it happen? There's something fundamentally missing there. The other thing I'd say is, from what I've seen, ChatGPT, thankfully, came into existence just as I stopped being a professor. I got out just in time. But it can reproduce the kind of average essay that I was seeing in a freshman seminar. But so far, I haven't really seen it producing things that are truly excellent. And I'm not sure that it can ultimately model what some of the key human characteristics are that you would hope that classically educated students would have. Things like creativity, insight, intuition. I don't know if ChatGPT would receive, I guess it kind of does reject questions, but I tend to think, the best answer to an essay question is often the one that says, I don't agree with this question, or takes a different angle on it, right? And I'm not sure that ChatGPT does that kind of thing. So I think it speaks to the earlier comment about looking for signals, credentials and that sort of thing that would point to, oh, this is going to be a person of substantive quality who I would want to hire. And, I think you are starting to see this problem that, a degree doesn't necessarily distinguish you. And part of the reason for that is because of the lack of quality of education that you're getting at a lot of colleges and universities these days. Whereas if you meet someone who's classically educated, you often can realize right off the bat, oh, this person is different. They have substantive skills and abilities that other students don't have. And so I think people are starting to recognize that. It's like, okay, it's great, you've got a degree from Penn State, but now I need to know, okay, really, how good are you? Whereas if you have a degree from a classical, Christian college or something like that, people who have experience with students from those colleges will know, oh no, these are quality students. And I can remember that from places that I've taught at before. We would get one graduate hired into a company or into an industry, and they would keep coming back. Right, and then they know that's the signal, right, for them. If you have a degree from this place, chances are you're going to be the kind of person that we want to hire.
Great. Jeremy, can I comment on that for a moment?
Please do.
So I had a conversation with the chair of our economics department, Dr. Gabriel Martinez, quite a while ago, and I just asked him, why educate students in a classical liberal arts tradition? And he gave me some statistic. He's an economist, so of course he had a good statistic for me. But it was something about the average person graduating college changing professions, changing careers 7 times in their life, right? And the comment was made earlier, and I think this goes along with what you're saying, that the job that a 12-year-old will have by the time they graduate from college may not exist today, right? And we know that, and that's not going to slow down. I don't think that's just going to exponentially increase. So what you want is not training for a specific profession, for a specific task. You don't want that. What you want is formation and education that prepares you for change, right? That prepares you to be able to adapt quickly to change. And I don't think there's anything that does that better than the classical liberal arts.
Great. That's very well said. The last question for our panelists is going to be, what are you most excited about thinking and imagining the future, imagining these students going out into the world as this movement continues to grow? And ask that fully aware that for a lot of people, I think right now, we're in kind of a depressing moment. I think so many Americans woke up, as we've heard from panelists after panelists over the past 24 hours, woke up during COVID to, in some ways, how bad things are. But with that waking up, there's also tremendous opportunity as well. So start again with Dr. Thompson, Antoine.
Thank you for asking that. I want to make my answer to this question sort of a follow-up to this last discussion as well. One of the things that we're always having to do, of course, is to justify our work based on utility, right? So we're always having to make the arguments that we make. Ultimately, classically educated students are employable. It's a useful thing. And it's all very, very true. Because it's a good, other goods emerge from it. But I'm also sort of curious about flipping that upside down and saying, as we know, classical education prepares students to live well, cultivates virtue, serve the common good, all of those things. They're the liberating arts. They make our souls free, and so on. And so it's interesting to sort of flip that question upside down and then ask if the ultimate ends of education are preparing students for a life well lived, then maybe professional programs, for example, can also justify themselves on that merit, right? To what extent does learning nursing, for example, where we're having to deal with people in end-of-life situations, when we're ministering to people at their sometimes their greatest and sometimes their worst moments, how does that practical education prepare students for a life well lived? Help students serve the common good, and so on. Because I think that it works both ways. While classical education certainly does have utility, at the same time, I think it's important to sort of reverse the criteria and say ultimately education prepares us to live well, to serve others, and so on. And so we should also, since we sort of answer their questions, they should also have to answer our questions. And ultimately, that's a source of optimism for me and I think that's something we do very good at PBA. We have well-developed professional programs in pharmacy and in nursing, and the combination of the two, where our students are both sort of liberally educated, but then we also train them to be the hands and feet of Jesus, where they can take that liberal arts education out into the mission field, into the church, into businesses, and apply them in very practical ways to make other people's lives better. What we ultimately realize is, in admissions, we always sell higher ed as it's all about you, kiddo. We're going to make your dreams come true. We're going to, this is going to be your experience of a lifetime. But what we often forget is this much older tradition where my education is an obligation that I'm fulfilling to our republic, to my neighbor, to the kingdom, and so on. And so I think that's a source of optimism, as more and more students realize that their education isn't just a selfish endeavor, but it's a pursuit of service and commitment that I'm fulfilling to others.
That's great. Adam.
Yeah, I definitely think young people are hungry for responsibility and duties and things of that nature, right? In a world that doesn't want to give it to them. They're attracted to those places that will give them those opportunities. I think it might be easy to look at the state of the country or the world and think, oh my goodness, how did things get this bad? But I think that's a very surface level look. I think if you scratch the surface even a little bit, I think it'd be very hard to despair at the future of the country if you've been on Ave Maria's campus, if you've been on Hillsdale's campus, if you've been on PBA's campus and you've interacted with the students in any capacity. And then, or if you've been on the campus of a Chesterton Academy, if you've been on the campus of any number of these charter schools that are here with us today, that makes it so much easier to have hope. And when you consider the fact that those are the places whose enrollments are growing, I hope even more reason for hope. And I think in the same way that parents did wake up at the kind of K-12 level to what was going on in education in the sort of COVID and post-COVID world, my thought is, and my hope is, and I think we're starting to see this, they're also taking those same considerations now to the college level. So I think that institutions that are strong in their faith, that do adhere to their mission, that do understand the role of the parent in education, and do understand that this is about something much more than just us, and this is about something much more than just merely productivity, are in a position very well for the future.
Yeah, there.
So there was this interesting idea brought up earlier of people being first generation classically educated. Mm-hmm. How many of us in the room are first generation classically educated? How many people in the room are second generation classically educated? So maybe one. So I guess what I'm excited about is that we're not very far away from that group of people who are second generation classically educated to go way up. So I'm excited by the idea of kids graduating from these schools, I mean, coming to places like Hillsdale and Ave Maria and Palm Beach Atlantic, and then going back and being teachers at these schools, or moving back to those communities and having their own kids go to those schools. I just think that the reach when you get to that second generation is just so much bigger, and so much more opportunity. You know, now we struggle to find teachers and leaders who really understand what all this is, what it's supposed to look like. But to have kids who are raised in that, who know what that looks like, who speak that language, be in it, I think that would just be awesome.
Love that. Love that. All right, Dr. McGuire.
Yeah, so at ACTA, we focus on three things: academic excellence, academic freedom, and accountability, fiscal accountability. And, in a lot of ways, when I look at those three things, across the country, I'm not an optimist by nature, I guess, and there's things to be worried about. But at the same time, I see a lot of movement, to do something in each of these areas. CLT is a great example in terms of academic excellence, in terms of academic freedom. We're seeing, for instance, and we work with alumni, we're the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and we're seeing alumni groups pop up all over the country who are pushing their colleges to improve the conditions for freedom of expression and academic freedom on their colleges. So, similar to what others have said, I think people are starting to take notice, and not just about the education that their kids were not receiving in the public schools, but also at the college and university level. People are noticing that, the free expression that we should expect to have at a public university is actually not available. And people are starting to ask questions about, why do these things cost so much? What is the money going towards? What are we getting for our money? And I think all of the things that we work on at ACTA, you can see that people are, increasingly paying attention and wanting change.
That's great. Got time for just a few questions. There's questions for the panelists here. Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
Do you have thank you.
Man needs no mic, clearly. Man needs no mic.
Oh, thank you.
That's a teacher voice. That's a teacher voice.
Speak from right here.
That's right, yeah.
Do you have a person or an event after which education took a remarkably quick downhill turn? Say like Richard Weaver blaming all of this on William of Ockham and nominalism, or I personally blame Sesame Street, but I'd love to hear you guys where the turning point comes in and things start going downhill very fast. Horace Mann, John Dewey, villains of the story.
I don't think Dewey helped.
I'm going to go with Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird. It was with the introduction of the Dewey Decimal System. It's supposed to be a pun on John Dewey, but I'm sorry.
I mean, one example you might point to is, when some of the Ivies stopped requiring a specific core. Right, there was a huge debate about that, and obviously those who wanted to maintain a required standardized core lost that argument, and we're still bearing the fruits of that today. I mean, I remember when I was a student, I had a copy of a book that was teaching me, how to read Homer in Greek, and the preface to the book said, this book about this thick contains all the passages from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey that American high school students will be expected to know for entrance to most American colleges and universities, right? And now most of us, myself included, graduate from college without knowing any Latin or Greek. So that's a radical change in a relatively short amount of time as far as these things go.
Yeah, Ivies are trendsetters if we love them or hate them, but yeah, for sure. Fantastic. Soren Schwab.
Been out of the class before confusing.
Thank you. I think it's no secret that classical schools have a complicated relationship with AP. Not just because of the College Board, but just the perceived misalignment of their classical curriculum and AP classes, but then also the conflict of, well, we want to support our families, we want them to be successful, they want to get into college, and obviously there's a financial component too. How do you have conversations with either with families or with schools about the value of these AP classes, these AP credits?
Sure, I think we're all waiting for you guys to come up with the alternative to AP. So, yeah. I think for all three of our schools that have liberal arts core curricula that we want our students to take, I don't want to encourage students to test out of an experience at our school. I want them taking Western civilization at Ave Maria, right? I'm not terribly interested in them getting a 5 on the standardized assessment from AP. Certainly you can, and I understand that there are financial considerations to do so, but education is about more than simply checking boxes, right? And all of us do have boxes that need to be checked for students to graduate from our schools. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but it's about more than that. And I would rather students take those courses at Ave Maria, study them with our faculty, with their peers, right? And it's a huge part of where you're going to go to school is who are your peers going to be, right? So I think there's tremendous value to that, but it is difficult. Tom and I are in a situation where there's this great state program, the Florida Bright Futures program, that incentivizes students to stay in state. But neither of us can, in good conscience, really talk to Floridians about, well, you should really take the CLT instead of the SAT or the ACT, because if you do, you're potentially leaving, I don't know, $6,800 on the table of state money from the Florida Bright Futures program. That's about to change, right? That's about to change as well. But so it is difficult to work within these frameworks. And I think anytime you've got these really large sort of these organizations like AP and like College Board that have such a monopoly, it makes it difficult for those of us who are operating in different types of worlds to operate in them. But I would much rather have a student take that test from CLT or preferably at Ave Maria. So.
This is one of my great weaknesses because it's so hard not to be snarky. The students are so proud of all the AP credits they learn, and they so want to impress us with all the AP credits, and I so want to dismiss that, right? Right. The message, of course, is general education is an obstacle to be cleared on the way to your major, which is what really matters, what really counts in your education. And so, it's we talk about those kinds of things and how it's just sort of this uniquely American institution where we take the best and brightest and tell them, you should have less college, right? Spend more, like totalitarian nations, you take your smart kids, give them more school. Only in America do we say, well, you're so smart, you don't need to go to school. So, there I am being snarky. Forgive me.
Any other comments? Soren, it's a great question too.
Yeah, so at Hillsdale, the way that we've responded to this is just to simply not allow any AP classes to really count towards the core or towards your major. So you'll get elective credit for those. It'll go towards, your graduation credits in the long term, but it's not going to make as much difference. I think the thing that I really would like to sit down and explain to parents about this, if they could hear, but the problem is they're part of a system that rewards otherwise, is that 20 years ago, there were a lot fewer opportunities for college credit than there are today at the high school level. 20 years before that, there were no opportunities for college credit at the high school level. Do we think that kids 20 years ago and 40 years ago were less well prepared for college? I think almost everybody thinks the opposite. So we've incentivized kids to get these credits, which from a actual level of building knowledge and capability and stuff appear to be meaningless.
Final comment, Dr. McGuire.
I would just echo what the three gentlemen have said. It's much preferable to have the students, get the full college experience in these subjects. Certainly, there's, you can understand the financial reasons for wanting to take AP credits, but much better to actually study the subject in college than just, try to clear a hurdle.
Let's hear it for our panelists here if we could. A couple kind of closing announcements, if we could. The party isn't quite over. We're going to be having, what is it called, a mocktail party down on the lawn. It's called the Rinker Green, which is a grassy area, one floor down. Before we leave out of here, though, let's hear it again. Our great host, Palm Beach Atlantic University. Thank you. We'll give you a personal tour if you take your students, son, daughter, out here. Again, great work they're doing in the honors program as well. The little flower, the beautiful flowers at the center of your table, they're either going to go in the trash or on your kitchen table. So bring one of those as well. Those are fair game. So take one of those as kind of a way to remember this and to pray for the work of CLT going forward. Words fail. I can't thank you enough. I talked to an elected official in Florida a few weeks ago who said something along the lines of, you wouldn't believe how many parents and schools and even homeschool students have reached out to elected officials in Florida regarding CLT. The amount of love we've received in this state, really unlike any other state in the country. So really, words fail. Can't thank you enough for the enthusiasm about the work we're doing. We will see you downstairs on the green. Thank you.